I got into this kind of happenstance, but I just absolutely love. I'm not a woodland educated person at all. I started out as a pharmaceutical chemist for 3M, making asthma inhalers. Did that my entire career. I retired last September after 31 years, and I enjoyed it thoroughly. But in that time, I was a woodland owner and a big member of WOA. And WOA sponsored 3 weekends throughout the year. It was a Woodland Leadership Institute. And it allowed us to go to 3 different areas in Wisconsin to talk to different experts, DNR and the Wildlife Service, and they all would speak different woodland aspects. And that really turned me on, to see some of the activity that happens in woodland. So we had to do a final project, and I picked starting a grassroots effort of educating with buckthorn, and that was probably 15 years ago, and I'm still doing it. And I've learned that part of my work plan was education, and I thought it would be as simple as like, okay, you educate this person and grassroots, it goes just going to snowball. But boy, was I wrong. And I realized that education is the biggest part of teaching about buckthorn, but you need to enforce people, to take what they've learned and tell your neighbors, tell other people. And maybe I'm that 1 in a million person, I don't know, but I love doing it and telling people because I've seen the results of good buckthorn control. And where I live, I didn't have so much buckthorn on one of my properties. I have one property that is absolutely full of it, and I've thrown my arms up because I'm one of those people. And those are the people I like to talk to because I'm in that same boat. But I've got property in Sawyer County, I've got property in St. Croix County, so it's diverse. But yesterday I came here and I set up and I looked, and Dan says, we've got buckthorn. I'm like, great, right next to the parking lot. And I came and I looked, I'm like, oh my gosh, you got glossy buckthorn here. And this is like the 2nd or 3rd place in the state I've seen it. I'm sure it's more places, but whenever we talk about buckthorn, we talk about common buckthorn because that's the one that spreads like wildfire. I'll never forget yesterday, Dan, talking to you and said it likes wetter areas. And he goes, well, that makes sense. We've got some wetter areas in the back corner. We've got some buckthorn back there. And this is glossy buckthorn, and it loves wetter areas. It'll take drier sites like this because it's opportunistic. But I was surprised. As far as control, it just doesn't change anything. The big thing is identification. Common buckthorn is very easy to identify. When you get bigger, I just tell people, if they get confused, some people confuse buckthorn with cherry trees. I said, just take your pocket knife and scrape the bark. This is common buckthorn. Scrape the bark, and it'll be just pumpkin orange underneath. Very easy to identify. Not so easy with glossy buckthorn. And I'm as guilty as anybody with proper identification of glossy buckthorn. As a matter of fact, my brother, this spring, I said, geez, you've got glossy buckthorn on your property. So he started cutting it out. Well, here it was chokecherry. Dang it. And I didn't look at it close enough, and he kind of knew what it was, and he started cutting, and then he questioned me on it, and I went and looked, and I go, yeah, that's chokecherry. But I tell you, I hope people don't take that literally and think that this is chokecherry, because if you make this into a jam, you're going to have nothing but neighbors that are going to be cursing at you because it's a laxative. So I could see that happening. You look at this looks like chokecherries. But, chokecherries come on they're all berries on one string coming down, but, most people aren't going to know the difference. So the identification can be tricky between glossy buckthorn and other trees. And for me, not seeing it throughout Wisconsin, I was floored not to see common buckthorn here. But, so anyways, yeah, I got into it, and I just love working with landowners. And some of the things I hear from landowners is they see the buckthorn and they go, really? That's my privacy hedge. I go, yeah, no. And then I have other people that say, well, look at my big cherry trees. Look at my big oak trees. And then I tell them, I said, show me that little oak tree. Show me that little cherry tree. And they're like, I don't have any. I go, that's the problem. You've got 50 years where you've had no regeneration because all you've got is a cluster of buckthorn, and none of your native trees can deal with that, and they're not able to reproduce. And that's dangerous. And I also speak with people who, I warn them, I said, your neighbors are going to be very unhappy with you, some neighbors, because you're killing live trees. You know, what are you doing clearing your property out? And they don't realize what you're doing. You need to let them know what you're doing, because they will come to you and just hold a grudge. You know, what are you doing with your property? You're killing all those nice trees, all that good habitat. And then invariably in 5 years, I said, those same neighbors will come back and say to you, you are so lucky to have such a nice piece of property. And yeah, you know, you try to warn them, but you know, that's the part of it. You get rid of these patches of buckthorn, don't let them spread, and you will see native regeneration happen again. I mean, it's just like that. 3 steps I have to get rid of it, paramount, is to look for the areas that you've got trees that have the berries on them. And there's different ways you can treat it. A couple of them would be a cut stump. You would cut that tree off with either a chainsaw or a lopper or any other cutting device, and then you would treat that with the herbicide. The herbicide I use is similar to Garlon 4. It's called triclopyr as the active. And it's not something you could just go to the hardware store and say, I would like some triclopyr, because they won't know what you're talking about. So you have to be able to go online and find places that have it. I'm currently buying it from Do-It-Yourself Pest Control. There's many other places that sell it. I used to buy directly from Oligari, and I use the Oligari brand, but there's 2 types of chemicals when you're talking of triclopyr. There's 2 salts. There's an amine and there's an ester. And the amine they classify as a 3, and the ester is classified as a 4. I don't do anything with amines. Amines are water loving, so you can't mix oil and water together. So that it's always got to be 4. So Garlon 4, triclopyr 4. It's an oil, and you can mix your herbicide I mix it at 20%, and I don't mix it with regards to active ingredient. Some people look at the label and say there's 61% active ingredient. I'll base my formulation based on formulation percent of the active. I don't do that. That's too much work for everybody. I say just stick with 20%. 20% is easy. Or you can mix 4 parts of oil to 1 part triclopyr if you want. My entire career was formulating huge batches for asthma inhalers. So I work by weight percent. This I do by volume percent. So 20% works out to be about 25 ounces of triclopyr to 0.8 of a gallon of diesel. So I tell people take 25 ounces and dump it in your bucket and go to the filling station and put in 0.8 of a gallon of diesel. Easy, but diesel stinks. You know, you have to be careful with it. Any oil you don't want to get on your skin, because it helps get through your skin. It's the best transdermal active to get through to your bloodstream. So you always would want to wear gloves. Don't get splashes on you. I'm not saying it's terribly dangerous. It's just best practice. You know, always wear gloves. But yeah, so the first 2 that I talk about are basal bark and cut stump. Those are the ones where I would use this oil formulation. And that's a lot of work to cut. I mean, go in there with a chainsaw and cut. I so seldom cut anymore. As I tell people, what my main tool is right here. This is what I use. It's a foam brush and a can like this. And I walk around with my gloves, of course, and I'll just go and dab this on all the way around the trees, and I'll just kill them standing. I don't need to cut them down. I'm not in that manicuring. It'll fall on its own when it dies. And it's just one less thing to carry. You don't have to cut it. That's great. You know, so I use an aspect ratio of the diameter times 2 for the band. So for instance, you take a 3-inch tree. If the diameter is 3 inches, you double that. So if this was 3 inches, you'd make a band 6 inches around the entire stem. That's basal bark treatment. So you've got a complete band is important because as it absorbs and after it absorbs, it goes in and it kills that cambium layer. So it's like taking a knife and cutting that living tissue. It can't translocate anymore. It's done. So if you go halfway around, it still has some living portion. It can bypass that area here if you didn't kill it with enough herbicide. So it's important to not only do the proper band, but all the way around. So as a best practice, make sure you get all the way around. And that's called basal bark.
Does it matter if it's low on a tree or?
That's a good question. With me, I don't worry about the height. Everybody says, you know, you need to get it close to the ground. That's fine. If you want to bend over and get close to the ground and get a bad back like me, then yeah, more power to you. But I don't. I just reach at waist height, and that's what I do. I don't worry about height because basal bark is systemic. So it doesn't matter if you put it down or do it 2 feet up. It's still getting systemic. It's still going in and translocating. It doesn't matter about the height, you know. And conversely, when we use cut stump, where you take your chainsaw or cutter, most people like to cut it right next to the ground and dab. I don't worry about that. I just kill that top surface. I'm not going to damage my back. I'm just going to cut that top surface. Like I said, I predominantly do basal bark anyways, but you don't want necessarily to leave stubs dead in your woods like this, though. You know, they're kind of a fall hazard, but they'll eventually fall over and die on their own. But cut stump is the one instance where I would say you probably want to cut it down closer to the ground so it doesn't become a fall hazard. But so the first real step I have of I talk about efficiency, not letting people burn out, is always go in and locate, map it, draw it, whatever, store it in your head. Locate where those big berry producing trees, they're a dioecious, meaning they're male and female, so glossy buckthorn or common buckthorn, doesn't matter. Find out where those trees that have the berries on them, because in a nutshell, those are the ones where they get consumed by the birds, and that bird goes either over to your neighbors, or it might be a Tweety bird that stays resident and he flies over 40 yards for the night, and then he deposits the seeds 40 yards over. And very effective at spreading as a vector with birds. They come back in the spring. I have landowners who tell me that they love their birds and they love their berry tree because the birds just love the berries. And I tell them, I don't have substantiated truth, but I hypothesize that these robins, these grosbeaks that are coming back, they come back early. They're setting up a territory. They have nothing to eat, and they just eat buckthorn, and they don't know any better. And they eat it, and because it's a cathartic, there's a severe laxative, they get dehydrated. And those poor birds are trying to get nutrients after their long migration. The last thing they need is to be dehydrated and not get proper nutrition, electrolytes. And I think that it makes them succumb to disease, you know, in the spring, viruses and whatever. But I don't have substantiated truth. It just makes like common sense. These poor birds, it's the last thing they need. They need nutrition. So
basal bark treatment, can you do that during the dormant season?
When I speak of basal bark and cut stump, those are the two that I like to use during the dormant season. The dormant season being late fall, right through winter. And people are like, you can do it in the winter? Absolutely. Basal bark, technically you can do year round because you're not cutting the surface. If you cut that surface in the spring, what does it do? It weeps. All that herbicide, that if you were to put herbicide on there, that wound weeps and it just washes away, so it's not effective. but the tree has so much vigor in the spring that it wants to do nothing but go up. And you capitalize that in the fall when that herbicide can be applied and go south into the root system is the best, and sit there all winter and kill it. You know, that's big. So if all you do is just a step one, going in and getting rid of these mother trees, you're kind of like homeostasis. It just not going to spread as much. You're sure going to have some come in from the neighbors, but you're getting rid of the part that's spreading, you know. But you have to be very cautious when you go in and cut something like this out, because what's going to happen? All those berries you see on the ground here, and the ones that fell for the last 5-10 years, they're going to sprout. So you see a massive influx of buckthorn that comes after that cut. And there's two things that people have made mistakes. They'll go in and cut, and they see that just rapid growth. And sometimes people don't realize that you were supposed to apply an herbicide to that cut surface, and they didn't do it. And it just comes 10 times worse. So I tell people, don't even bother cutting it if you're not going to treat it, because it will be 10 times worse. It's just terrible. Multi-stems come back. I'm sure you've seen it on the edge of a yard where you've nicked a tree with a lawnmower, and then it's just multi-stems coming up. You can see the multi-stems coming up on the edge here. So it's important you treat them, but don't get frustrated when you see all of those little seedlings come up. That's where I have my second one is in the time of all year is after you get rid of all these big trees, just start working away at the next size down. Just try to keep ahead of it. That's, you know, step two. Just work at it as you can, but get the ones that are going to be mature next couple of years. But the last step that I have is like super duper important. It's called foliar spraying. Foliar spraying is taking your herbicide and spraying it on the leaves. Well, that's dangerous when you think about it. We have a lot of good trees around here. You don't want to damage those trees, but there's a certain time of the year for deciduous trees that you can apply and not kill the native tree, but you only kill the buckthorn. And this area is quite similar to over by Hudson. For me, it's averages October 20th. There's a 1 or 2 week window, depending on the year, where all the native trees are dormant. They've gone and dropped their leaves in the brown understory. All the ferns are brown, and everything is dormant. But you're sitting in your tree stand or whatever, and you see that green stuff, and you're like, oh, all that buckthorn. Well, as long as those trees have a leaf that I call it, you roll it in your hand like this really hard, and it kind of froths up. It has moisture in it. It's succulent, and that's what you want to have. You still want to have a succulent leaf. You don't want to have a leaf that crackles. You don't want it dry at all. You still want to have that translocation of when you spray that herbicide on there, it's going to absorb. Well, when you spray that herbicide in water, now you only have to mix it at 4%, but it's going to form an emulsion. So you take your Tricopure 4 and pour it in the water, it turns white. And it's white because there's all these fine oil particles of micelles. They're forming a beautiful emulsion. And now you're going to spray that on the leaves. And very, very effective. You get, you know, a somewhat windy day. I like to wear a respirator always, you know, when you're aerosolizing stuff, a particulate respirator. And I get the wind kind of wafting into these areas, and I spray these areas that have been previously cut, but they've just erupted back in buckthorn. And you will knock those out. And it's just so great to see coming back in the spring, and you'll go back in and you'll see all these stems that are dead, and you're like, wow, this is awesome. But there's only the one time a year that you can do it. So you want to drop what you're doing and capitalize on where you can kill all these little trees where you can't the rest of the year. It's just not feasible to go and pick all of them and cut them, and just too hard. And you will see native trees start reproducing. All of a sudden you come back in the spring and there's that little oak tree coming up and it's like, wow, this is great.
Does buckthorn only spread with the berries, or is it a root thing?
No.
Root thing too.
It's more the masses spread. Our enemy are crows, are the biggest culprits. They're the long distance spreaders. Tweety birds, I've noticed, are opportunistic. If you have prairie crab apples or crab apples in your yard, the robins love those and they come back in the spring. But it also draws them in if you've got neighbors who have buckthorn. Now all of a sudden, these Tweety birds are eating your crab apples and depositing buckthorn underneath when you're feeding.
It's the same thing. I'm in Marathon County. I've been seeing it on the news where the Marathon County Park Systems has the goats come in.
Yeah.
That's really not gonna, it will take care of it for that year, but because they're pooping the seeds out, it's gonna be back next year, right?
Well, the main reason they do that is just to get rid of the fiber part of the trees and just get rid of it. I mean, this is a one time of the year, and I always tell people cut it before the seeds are viable.
Yeah.
Sometimes even if you're very concerned, drop it on a tarp and take it to burn it. But you have to cut your loss. You know, at some time, just getting rid of that tree is paramount. If you leave that tree covered with berries and it sits there, it's no different than that berry shedding. Berries getting shedded one year anyways, but it's more important just to get it cut. It's great.
Don't leave it get to the berry part.
Yeah,
Keep it down.
yeah. Always don't let the berries come. The people that are doing the goats, it's great, but I personally don't like it a lot because they're not discriminating what they're eating. They're just making it like a carpet in there, and you have to follow up. If they eventually you would think that, you know, after time you would do it, but you've been mowing over here for how long, and you still have the buckthorn coming up. So it takes a lot of time and energy, but you can't necessarily just cut it and kill it. It's you have to, and there's people that don't like using chemicals, and I get it, you know, but it's a lot more work to hand pull everything. You know, they make the weed wrench, and I have a weed wrench, and I let people use it, and they come back and I go, oh, that was a lot of work. But people, they get frustrated because they see that as work. And if you follow this 3-step process, it's work to begin with, and it's always going to be work, but hopefully you don't get frustrated because you start seeing tables start turning. You start seeing that native regeneration coming back. You look, what we've seen, my prediction is in this area, I'm thinking 60 years maybe, somebody came out in their yard, and I look at buckthorn as initially getting here and spread when people became affluent. They moved into the cities and they started landscaping. I mean, really, that's what happened. That was one of the top landscaping trees. I know it is. This buckthorn or glossy buckthorn here, I remember my parents had it in their yard. And now it's just all over in the property that I own. And it's like, what do we do about this? And so they don't sell it anymore. That's great. But it's already naturalized. That's the problem, you know, and you're never going to get rid of it unless everybody gets rid of it. You'll never get rid of it. So it's... that gap is a little concerning, you know, when you get to those people that they're proud of their big trees and they don't see the lack of little trees as being a problem, and it's a huge problem. And not only is it a huge problem that there aren't little trees, those little trees are fighting not only against the buckthorn not getting enough sunlight, but you've got deer that are massively overpopulated, and what are they going to eat? They're going to eat buckthorn, or they're going to eat that nice oak seedling, you know, so they preferentially are eating the trilliums, the good flowers, and oaks, and so it's a big battle. It's important to have a strong understory of a multi-generational good trees, native trees growing, and you have to disrupt it. You have to get rid of the buckthorn. It's just very, very important.
I'm going back to your 3-step process, and you know, yesterday I had tremendous amount of buckthorn, all about 3 feet high.
Yeah.
Now, have I set that up to let it grow, and then can I go in and spray that when it gets to be just at that right, you know, like kind of like the stuff that's in back of you there,
Absolutely.
2 feet high. I kind of set it up maybe, and then when it gets to be like maybe up to knee high, and then just spray.
That's perfect. But you want to do that in that October time frame.
Even though it's-
Well, not necessarily there. It won't matter because you don't have oak trees over there. But my only concern would be you don't want to get any on the conifers that are there. So you have to be careful. Down spray, whatever.
So maybe if it just when it
Absolutely. If you can control it and not get any on the conifers, you're going to be fine. And with water, it kind of drifts like that. You want to have more of a coarse spray, so be careful. So, yeah, you don't have to worry so much about water penetrating like bark. But I still think a needle is like a leaf. I would never recommend overspraying with water and trichopyr on a conifer.
maybe back to it'll be like that,
Yeah.
leafy, and then I can.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you would see a marked difference. It will get rid of it for good. Absolutely. It'd be similar to going in there with picking every one of them out. They're gone. So, Did you have a question?
It's a good thing I'm here listening to this because if my husband would have tried to cut that down in our woods, he would have been in big trouble.
Because he wouldn't have treated it. Right.
I wouldn't have known any of this.
Yeah.
I would have been yelling at him, "What are you doing cutting that down? I like that
Oh,
hedge."
you're that privacy hedge
Yes,
person. Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. You're the neighbor that says,
Yeah.
"What are you doing killing that tree?"
He would have been in big trouble.
Yeah.
Birds love it.
Yeah.
That's exactly what I would have been saying.
Yeah.
What are you doing cutting that down? He would
This-
have been in big trouble.
This because it's considered exotic invasive. Exotic not supposed to be here, and invasive it just takes over. It's bad, and don't feel bad. I mean, you are not by any means a minority. There are a lot of people like you, and that's where the education is important. When you hear this, you tell your friends, "Hey, that is not a good
And I wouldn't
bush."
have believed him either.
Oh no! Why would you believe me? I'm just telling you. Yeah,
So in other words, you want to cut that so the native, the oaks and the maples. And
absolutely. Yeah,
Native shrubs.
and
like that green, we have a lot of that in our woods right now. That cucumber plant too.
yeah, wild cucumber.
Well, yeah, that's what
Yeah.
I call it. Should go right.
Yeah, it's fine just to pull it out. Yeah,
One thing you'll find out if your land, if you have land that's enrolled in the managed forest law, and you have let's say you have a mature stand of oak and it needs to be regenerated. It's a mature stand, and your management plan calls for a regeneration harvest. If you have buckthorn in your woods, that's going to be a huge problem because the buckthorn will inhibit the regeneration of the oak, the natural regeneration. It'll take over, and you'll do your overstory removal harvest, and you'll lose everything. All you'll get is a whole,
Yep,
stand of
monoculture.
beautiful buckthorn. So the DNR foresters will say, if you're in MFL, the program requires that you have a healthy forest after the harvest. So you're going to have to control the buckthorn, and it'll be a requirement under managed forest law for you to control that buckthorn. So if you've got it, the proactive thing to do is get a lid on it right away before you have to do any cutting, because when you open up that stand, you're going to release buckthorn if it's there. Right?
That's exactly right. I would never ever recommend a harvest. I don't know how a logger in his right mind can go into a buckthorn infested stand and cut it. I really,
Because of oak wilt.
well, that's one of the concerns. But you can oak wilt you can target and do it different times of the year. It doesn't matter when you cut those big trees out. It's ultimately going to come all back in buckthorn.
Yeah, the oak wilt, like in the part of the southern state where my daughter lives, within 2-3 years, the oak just fall over, and they have a huge buckthorn problem
Yep.
to begin with.
Yeah.
So
And the oak isn't there to control it somewhat
Shade it.
with these massive oak
Yeah.
trees, and they're just
Yeah, they can persist in the shade, but when they get the sun, it just explodes.
Yeah.
Right here along the edge of the parking lot, it just becomes a wall of buckthorn.
And another important thing is we're more educated to know what a good woodland is. We know what a pine tree is. We know what a maple tree is. Somebody moving out from the cities, to them that's a beautiful tree.
Yeah.
You know?
Up in the country, and I think it's a beautiful.
Right. But you know, it crept up. I tell you,
No clue.
it didn't used to be here. You know, and it's not just buckthorn. You've got garlic mustard. You've got a host of all these other terrestrial things that are coming, and it's sad that we have global commerce now that moves these things around, and we have to deal with it. This unfortunately came because it made a great landscaping, and once it got, somebody didn't trim their tree in their yard like my parents, then it got into the adjacent property, and now I'm starting to see glossy buckthorn 4 miles away from my property. And where do you think it came from? My property. It's sad, and because it's glossy buckthorn, and I know that. Common buckthorn is just everywhere by us. It's predominantly common buckthorn. So
How do you tell the difference between the two?
there's a little name tag on them. No, no. It's very, very tough. With common, it's like I'd suggest grab one of these that explains the difference. But buckthorn is not a good name. People think thorn, and a lot of times they think of prickly ash is native. Prickly ash is good. It's great habitat. That's not buckthorn. Buckthorn really doesn't have a thorn so much. On glossy buckthorn, you take that terminal bud, it spreads like this, and it'll have a little thorn right in the middle of it, and that's the thorn. So this looks like a buck's foot, and then there's this little thorn in here. Common or glossy buckthorn, you don't have that, so it's a little more difficult. You can see the berries kind of ride out on the branches. If this was a choke cherry, you would have the branches, or I'm sorry, the berries would come down on pretty much like grapes, you know, on one strand. But I can see where somebody would see this as not glossy buckthorn, but they're going to can it thinking it's choke cherry and just add sugar to it. You know,
Be on the toilet.
right, and it didn't dawn on me until what happened to me with my brother. You know, telling him, I said, I think you've got glossy buckthorn on your property, because he's 4 miles away from my property that's infested with it. So, and he does have glossy buckthorn. I know he does. It's just not where I was telling him he had it. So,
This day and age, you can take a picture and send it to the DNR health folks, and they'll.
absolutely, they'll nail it. Yeah.
You were talking about garlic mustard,
Yes. Yes.
and we have lived at our house for like 7 years now. And when we first got there, Dan identified garlic mustard between our house and the neighbors. And
So you went and picked it all out. Good.
he did
Did he?
every year.
Oh, yeah.
Every year.
Yeah. 12 years.
7 years. Sometimes spraying with a little bit of Roundup, sometimes just picking.
Yeah. Yeah.
And just recently, this week, he found one.
No.
Oh, they are persistent.
And it sets you back again. I feel terrible because I've been doing my neighbors for 12 years. Well, I got a back problem this year and I wasn't able to do it. And they're not going like, well, I'll do it. You know, they depend on me to do it. So I have about 80 acres that I had been doing, you know, little different spots. And all it's going to take is 1 year. And I'm sorry, but I can't get in there. And that sets me back. I lost 12 years. So it's unfortunate, but
They go to seed.
yeah. Yeah, and
One little garlic mustard can
and-
produce hundreds of seeds.
and garlic mustard gets spread a lot by deer, any deer trail you can find. Raccoons, squirrels, base of trees, and it like that one you're talking about, you're trying to get rid of it. Oh, I got rid of my patch, and then 1 week you go 100 yards over and you didn't realize there's another patch, and
We're
that's
doing our neighbors now. He's doing.
yeah.
The neighbor on the other side has it. He's got a big patch of garlic mustard.
But now you got to ask, how did it get there? You know, did a wood duck bring it in? Did a high water event bring it in? You know, where did it come
The
from?
trucker lived. at
No,
So
the gravel.
Well, no, we had a neighbor on the other side that worked in Madison and commuted back and forth to Madison every day, and the garlic mustard showed up right next to their driveway And
On
I
his
think-
tires.
I think the seed came from southern Wisconsin, as, you know, just from their work commute every day.
Sure.
And
I'm suspicious it wasn't a forester that was out in the woods.
Yeah. Yes.
That's
no,
my theory.
I didn't live there yet. I just
Yeah.
bought that house.
Yeah.
Because
But it
your own boots will carry it.
Yeah, you
It-
can. Yep.
it's
Get on your own boots.
it's interesting to hear the different stories. And in my area, last year, I said there's got to be find where this is coming from because it was along a river. And I'm like, I don't know where this came from, but I'm going to find out. And I walked upstream, and it wasn't very much. And all of a sudden, here's somebody's yard, and their wound system is just covered with it. Because that's a trucker brought it in with some contaminated dirt. So wherever that trucker's getting the contaminated black dirt, he's contaminating all these different satellite areas every 20 years with a new septic system.
The water will
First-
let it flow down.
Yeah.
First time I saw garlic mustard in central Wisconsin was about 15 years ago, 15, 20 years ago. And the place I saw it was around ag fields, around a perimeter ag fields. And I thought,
Really?
what is that? Well, all of a sudden the light went on. All these farmers in central Wisconsin contract out their combining.
Yes.
And the combine contractors start in the south and they move north.
And
As
it's-
they come north, they harvest the corn as it matures. And the garlic mustard was showing up next to all these
Contaminated
crop
equipment.
fields that had been harvested with combined with these contract combiners. I'm sure the garlic mustard came in on that equipment.
And the same is true with logging. You know, make sure the people coming in to do a logging, you make sure their equipment is clean.
And do follow up. After the year after they're in there, go in there and look.
And find, make sure they didn't.
Find it, nip it in the
I
bud.
write in a lot of our forestry plans now to evaluate after the harvest because you can say it's clean, but it's almost impossible
Yeah.
to keep it clean.
And when you just said that one, that is so true. That one, that's all it takes. It's all it takes is one that gets missed.
The good news is we've been dealing with a lot down in the south. In our area, I've got landowners that I've worked with where they've done heavy control and it's still just as vigorous as what they can. And there's areas they haven't done anything and it's actually gotten less.
I've heard that it's starting to get something biologic down there.
Well, and it just seems it's an invasive, so it peaks.
Yeah.
But it might take 10 or 15 years, and then it starts to
taper
decline.
off.
Yeah.
And we're still finding the native flora there. The deer are a bigger problem with the native flora.
Yeah,
actually,
I know
than
because
the
Yeah.
what I found with my glossy buckthorn on my property 3 years ago, I went and it was completely defoliated, but only the glossy buckthorn. So I reported it to the NR and I said, I've got something going on here. I don't know what it is, if it's a biologic that's coming in and nobody knows about, but wouldn't that be nice if we had something that it would be similar to like somebody mowing it every year, but it's defoliating it. And then it was amazing to see. It was just be like completely eaten, just completely eaten. And I still don't know what it is. They thought maybe it was a moth that was coming through on the way to Canada. They didn't know for sure, but I haven't been to that property this year, but it's probably getting defoliated about this time of year. So
Jack, our time is up.